Erica? Huh? Okay, I'll have to get you a copy of it. All right. I'm going to talk about adding integers today. Okay? First thing we need to talk about is absolute value. Okay? The absolute value of any number is the distance a number the absolute value is the distance a number is from 0 on a number line. Okay? So, for example, if I have this number line, right here we have 0, then we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. On the other side, we have -1, -2, -3, -4, -5. So, if we look at this number right here, 4, okay, how many units from 0 is 4? So, 4 is 5 units from 0. Look, folks, 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 units. So 4 is 4, the distance from 0 is 4. Okay, now, what about -4? How many units is -4 from 0? Huh? No, there's not negative units. How many units? 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so -4 and 4 are 4 units from 0. Okay, so that means the absolute value of those two numbers is 4. How we express the absolute value is this way, with two vertical lines. Okay, these vertical lines mean absolute value. Okay, now, the absolute value of -4, we've already said, is 4, because it is 4 units from 0. So the absolute value of 4 is also 4. Okay, so the absolute value of all numbers is never negative. Okay, the absolute value of all numbers is never negative. Okay, so then if I wanted to know, without doing the number line, if I wanted to know the absolute value of -8, what would the absolute value of -8 be? 8. Okay, so what is the absolute value of 7? 7. What is the absolute value of 105? 105. Okay, so the absolute value is the number of units a number is from 0. For example, if I decided I wanted to give Nikki a $20 bill, okay, but then I realized my mistake, and I took the $20 back from Nikki. Okay, well, she was feeling pretty positive when I gave her the $20. But now she's feeling pretty negative because I took the $20 away. Well, did the value of how much she can buy with a $20 bill ever change? No, it's still $20. Okay, just because I took it away from her doesn't mean it's $10 all of a sudden, or it's $20. Okay, so the absolute value is similar to money. Whether you get it taken away, that money has a certain value every single time. Okay, Same is true with the absolute value of integers. Okay, the absolute value of any integer is simply the number of units it is from 0. So if I had, you won't, but what if we had the absolute value of 0? Well, how many units from 0 is 0? 0, okay? So obviously it's 0. Okay, so that's what the absolute value is. It's important to know that because we'll have to deal with it here in a few minutes. Now, I want to talk about the actual adding of integers. Okay, we need to think of integers. Once again, integers are positive and negative counting numbers. Okay, integers are positive and negative counting numbers. We covered that on Friday, gave that definition on Friday, so I'm not going to rewrite it. But, for example, let's say I had -8 plus +7. Now, remember, the book is always going to include the positive sign. We do not have to do that. Okay, if you want to, fine. That's more than all right to do that. Okay, but eventually you're going to have to not do that because you're going to be writing so much stuff you're not going to have time to write positives in front of each number. Okay, now, what I want you to think about is this. If we think of -8, well, that's just like 8 negative signs. Okay, if we think of +7, that's like one too many. That's like 7 positive signs. Well, I remember back in science, I think this is true, but when a positive and a negative charge cancel each other out. Okay? Just like a neutron and a proton sort of cancel each other out. Same thing with negatives and positives. Okay? So, for every positive, it cancels out a negative. So if we just cancel these out, okay, you're left with what? 1 negative. So the answer to that problem then is -1. Okay. Now, here's what we did mathematically. Here's what you're doing mathematically. Okay, mathematically, you're doing this. Anytime that we have a negative and a positive, okay, we take the absolute value of those two numbers. What is the absolute value of -8? 8. What is the absolute value of 7? And we subtract their absolute values. So 8 minus 7 is 1. Okay, now, which one has more, the negative or the positive? The negative, so that's why it's -1. Okay, that's the mathematical rule, definition, whatever property that we're using there. Lily, darling? Well, you're going to have to know how to do it this way because you're not going to be able to draw positive signs, all that kind of stuff when we're doing 132 plus a -178. So you're going to have to know what we're doing to handle the more complicated stuff that's going to come a little this year, more so next year than it is. You know, you've got to understand the rule and what you're doing. So however you have to do that, whether you've got to visualize it as positives and plus and negative signs, or whether you visualize it on a number line. Another way people like to visualize it is money. If I took $8 from Quaid and then I felt bad about doing that, so I gave him $7 back the next day, did he gain or lose money? He lost money, and he lost $1. So he's going to feel negative about that. So some people look at it that way. Bottom line is, I don't care which way you look at it, but you have to know what we're doing, and you have to know the rule of why we can do it. Quaid? Mm-hmm. It would be 7, but would it be negative or positive? Negative, right. No. It's which one has the most. For example, this same exact problem, if I have 8 plus negative 7. Okay, well, 8 plus negative 7, we take the absolute value of 8, absolute value of negative 7, so that's 8 minus 7, and that is 1. Now, which has the larger absolute value, 8 or negative 7? 8 does. So the positive has the larger absolute value, so that's going to be a positive 1. Okay, but it's still 8 minus 7. It's still a larger number, subtracting the smaller number from it, but you look at it in a sense, and once again, that gets back to that, well, I've got 8 positives over here and 7 negatives over here, so there's more positives than there is negatives, so it's got to be a positive answer. Okay? Jacob? Like, what if they were 8 and negative 8, or 8, negative 8, and negative 8? Okay, I'm fixing to cover that rule. Okay? Any other questions on this one?
What if it was negative 8 and 8?
Okay, it's still the same thing. If you have, like, this is one in the book, negative 9 plus 9. Okay? The key is I have a negative and a positive. Okay, I'll go ahead and put the positive sign there so we know that's what we're talking about. So you still, then, you take the absolute value of those two numbers. Absolute value of negative 9 is 9. Absolute value of positive 9 is 9. And you subtract them. And that's 0. The 0 is neither negative or positive because all of the negatives cancel. I got the same amount of negatives as I do the positives. So they all cancel each other out, leaving me with nothing, which nothing means 0. Huh? It's always subtraction because I have a positive and a negative. That's why it's subtracting their absolute value. It's not subtraction, it's subtracting their absolute values. Okay, now, let's look at one other example of this, and then I'll move to the next rule. Let's say I had negative 10 plus positive 15. Okay, so we take the absolute value of those two numbers. Okay, which is larger, the absolute value of 15 or the absolute value of negative 10? 15. So the 15 is going to be listed first, minus the absolute value of negative 10, which is 10. 15 minus 10 is 5, and I've got more positives than I do negatives, and so it's positive. Okay, because you had over here, you're going to have 15 positives. Over here, you're only going to have 10 negatives. They're going to cancel each other out, but you're going to have 5 positives left over. Or, once again, think of it in money terms. Okay, I took away $10, but then I felt bad, and so I gave you 15 the next day. So did you gain or lose? Did you gain or lose money? You gained money, and how much did you gain? You're going to feel pretty positive about that, right? All right. So now let's look at the opposite of this. The opposite of this would be if I had this, negative 10 plus negative 12. Okay? Well, if you think of it, that means I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 negatives on this side. Then I have negatives on that side. So I either have a bunch of positives or a bunch of negatives, and I have a bunch of negatives. How many negatives do I have? 22. So the answer is negative 22. Yeah. So all you do is if the signs are the same, just like you've been doing, what's 8 plus 5? 13. Well, you didn't know it, but 8 plus 5, they're both positive. So you just added the two numbers together. Okay? So the rule is when you have two negative integers, you add the two numbers together and keep the negative sign in your answer. Okay, obviously when you have two positive integers, it's what you've been doing since you were in, kindergarten, first grade, whenever. 1 plus 1, 2. Okay, so if 1 plus 1 is 2, 1 positive plus 1 positive is 2 positives, then 1 negative plus 1 positive would be what? 0. Okay, you subtract 1 minus 1. Okay, now the other rule that we've already discussed, I just want to put it in written form. When you have a positive and negative integer, you take the absolute value of each number and subtract the smaller absolute value from the larger absolute value. Now,
if we have more tonight, can we write the things going this way?
vertically, if it's more comfortable for you. Now, once you've subtracted the absolute values, you keep the sign of the larger absolute value in your answer. Okay, once again, we've already done this. We've already done that rule. I'm just writing down what we just talked about a few minutes ago. Okay, now, let's look at some examples. I'm going to write down 2 examples. I want you to do both of them. First one is this, positive 19 plus negative 1 and negative 17 plus positive 4. Okay, do those 2 problems. Visualize your positives and your negatives. If you'll visualize it, think in your mind, it'll help you out, help you understand what you're supposed to do. You have a question or you have any answers? Okay, hang on. Give you about 30 more seconds. The key to both these problems is because of those signs, you're supposed to do something, okay? All right. First one. Tayshawn, what did you get? Positive 18. That is correct. Okay. Take the absolute values and subtract them. 19 minus 1, which is 18. The larger absolute value is positive, so it stays positive.
Wait, this is a positive sign. I'm not confused. She's talking about the plus sign in the middle. Yeah.
That's an addition sign.
Yeah.
That's add. But because it's a positive and a negative, then I have to take the absolute value. Absolute value of 19 is 19. The absolute value of negative 1 is 1, and I've got to subtract those two. And so therefore, that's why it's 18. Yeah, no, you subtract them because it's a positive and a negative. You don't. That's why we're subtracting them. All right, now, negative 17 plus positive 4. Gabby. Negative 13. That is correct. Okay, the reason it's negative 13, negative 17, the absolute value of negative 17 is positive 17. The absolute value of positive 4 is 4, and we're going to subtract their absolute values. (17 minus 4 is 13. The larger absolute value is negative, and so therefore, now remember, the larger absolute value is the sign that we keep. Okay? In other words, if it looked like this, positive 4 plus negative 17. Okay, it doesn't matter which number comes first, it's which number has the larger absolute value. That's still negative 13. Both of them be negative? Well, once both numbers positive, you've been doing for the last 6 years. If you don't know how to do those right now, then we're in a sad shape. Huh?
No.
If you have the same numbers and it's a negative and a positive, then it's 0. If you have the same numbers and they're both negative, then you just add the two numbers up. Like negative 9 plus negative 9 is negative 18. Okay? All right, now, last thing. Negative 10 plus the missing number equals positive 2. Okay? So what they're saying is this. Over here, I have 10 negative signs. Over here, I have 2 positive signs. So what can I do to this group of negatives to cancel all of them out and have 2 left over, have 2 positives left over? What can go here that can cancel out 10 negatives and have 2 more positive signs left over? Isaiah. Positive 12. So it's positive 12, so you would have this right here. Okay, and you would have 5 of them canceled here, and 4, 5 canceled there, and then you'd have 5 of them canceled there, and you'd have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 canceled there, and there's your 2 left over. Okay, so the answer to that one is positive 12.
I'm not getting how we decide if it's a negative or a positive. If it's a position or subtraction. It all just says plus.
Okay, as I've stated right here in the rule, when you have a positive and negative integer, when you have a positive and a negative integer, you take their absolute values and subtract their absolute values. So if there's a positive and a negative number, then you're going to subtract their absolute values. That's the rule for adding a positive and a negative. Okay, that's the rule that we have to, yes, they're all going to say addition, and you are adding them, but one of the rules for addition is that if I have a positive and a negative, I must take their absolute values and subtract their absolute values. Right, Nikki? Yeah, go pick it up. Sophia?
On the one we have to fill in the
Uh-huh.
couldn't it be like -8?
Could it be -8?
No, you're gonna.
Can that?
Oh.
Let the guy who graduated college actually answer the question. Thank you much. No, because if you had -8, then you've got these 10 negative signs, and then you've got 8 more negative signs. And negatives don't cancel out negatives, okay? It's like the old saying, the old Santa Claus saying, well, if I do something bad, I got to do something good to make sure I stay on the good list and not the niceness and not the naughty list. Okay, it's similar to that. Okay, but obviously most of you are on the bad list, so we won't even talk about that. Just joking. I know I'm always on the naughty list. So, all right, let's look at another fill in the blank one. Let's say we had -3 plus the box, and that's equal to +4. So I have 3 negatives over here, and I have 4 positives over here. So I know for every negative I have, I've got to have a positive to cancel it out. So I've got to have a positive here. I've got to have those 3 positives, because those 3 positives will cancel those 3 negatives. But I need 4 over here, so that means I got to have 4 more negatives on this side. Okay, so Judah. Yes. +7 goes in the blank. Okay? And so that's your answer there, and that's your answer there. Trinity.
Could you just add these two, the +4 and the -3, and then get the same answer?
No, because if you add +4 and -3, you're going to get a +1 if you add them properly. The digits, that works on that one, yes. It works on the ones that are positive, and when you have a negative and a positive in your blank. Where it won't work is where you have, for example, let me see if there's one in here. Doesn't look like there is. Yeah, it doesn't look like there is one I was looking at. Yes, that will work for what you're thinking. All right, now let's look at one last one. -14 plus a +29. Okay, so I have a negative and I have a positive. So my rule says I've got to take the absolute value of both numbers and subtract the smaller from the larger. So the absolute value of +29 is 29. The absolute value of -14 is 14. So we must subtract the absolute values, because there was a positive and negative number. Okay? So 29 minus 14 is what? 15. And it's positive because I have more positive signs than I have negative. So it's +15. No, you do not. All right, now, let me quickly look. I can't remember what I signed for homework. Yeah, 3 through 38. That's what I thought. Now, you have 11.4, 3 through 38. Okay? 11.4, 3 through 38. That's your homework on this section.